Today we will start looking at one of the issues. Let me give you a bit of an introduction to it. And it is the idea that you may, and I'm not sure whether you've come across it, I'm not sure that it exists here in Germany, but in England and in America, it was something that came in. I'd have to look at the exact dates as to when it came around. But I remember sort of as early, I think, as 2013. I've got some material on it. So the chronology of it, I'll have to check. The concept is as follows, and I'm going to read you from... I'm going to read you from one source here, which is the concept of... Oh, here we go. It actually started in 2002. Partnership Minyanim. Have you heard of this?
I guess not really.
Okay, Ashrecha. But I'm afraid I am going to...
Have you heard of group aliyot? Reconstruction.
It's the next step.
No, you see that is fine. Sorry.
What?
No. Let me explain. Why are we discussing partnership? Why will we be spending a little bit of time? We'll probably spend a few sessions on partnership minyanim. Why? I'll tell you why. It is because Masorti, progressive, reconstructionist, gastronomic, whatever, my favorite kind of Judaism, by the way. But those things, that's fine. It's not fine.
Right.
But it does what it says on the tin. It says, we are not Orthodox. We do not accept that to be Reform, you don't even need to accept that there is a God. You don't need to be Jewish. You don't, whatever. It's some sort of nice, happy, clappy, feely, spiritual brotherhood and fraternity, and that's fine. It ain't Judaism, but it's fine. And we know. But the challenge, and I will say this, the challenge comes from a wolf in sheep's clothing. The challenge comes from within. And we need to know that there are movements and practices that claim to be orthodox. And one of the developments, if that's the right word, that started, here it says in 2002 in Shira Chadasha in Yerushalayim and Darach Einoim in New York, and there are over 80 partnership minyanim, they claim to be orthodox. This is the issue. I'll read you from... This is from Jewish Woman's Archive. I could just as easily have read you from JOFA, Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, and in England, you should know, it seems to have, I think, although I'm out of England for a while now, but I think it's died down a little bit, some of the controversy. But at its time, it was a big, raging issue. So I'll read you a definition here. This is from the Jewish Woman's Archive. I'll link it. I'll probably put a link to it on the YouTube video. The Partnership Minyan is an Orthodox feminist prayer service that seeks to maximize women's involvements in prayers while adhering to Jewish law or halacha. So the stated aim is, we are Orthodox. We accept the supremacy and the primacy of halacha, but there is a problem and there is a challenge, which is that we feel that women should be able to be more involved in things, and we want to try and do so. That is our stated aim, to do so within halacha. And they come up with this idea called the partnership minyan, which we will define. And the question is, I suppose there are two questions. The question is one of mutter and osa. Which aspects of it are mutter or osa? And then there is a much more subtle question, which is to say that tefillah, which is a public expression, right, is somehow insufficient. It's somehow deficient. It suffers from being part of the patriarchy. And I'm really not being sarcastic here at all. I'm going to read you from this definition. The first two parts. So this entails placing the bima in the middle and allowing women to lead select sections, although women do not count as part of the quorum of 10 men. So on the face of it, if you read it, it would perhaps appear to be difficult to object to it. Let me give you the background. Here, this is the background as it's given over here. The Orthodox movement, now first of all, I mean, the minute I began to, I'm going to read without comment and you tell me. I'm going to read a paragraph, okay? The Orthodox movement emerged in the 19th century in response to the perceived threat to Jewish tradition of the Reform movement and the Enlightenment.
It's not something that appeared Orthodox movement. That's the true. Yeah. That's the true Judaism.
You are quite right.
Actually, you can say that the other movements they are mentioning are appearing,
but not
themselves.
Correct. So this is. I nearly fell off my chair. Like, whoa, Orthodox
appeared.
So this is a really clever and quite sinister use of words. The first Orthodox synagogues were built in large part with the express purpose of keeping women out of the sanctuary. And this is a quote from Sana, 1987. Again, the first Orthodox synagogues were built. So here, the first thing is, guys, newsflash, Orthodoxy arrived in the 19th century as a response to Reform.
Right.
And Reform was a response to what exactly?
Right.
It's really quite fascinatingly stupid.
And all the shuls were what?
I have no idea. But the first Orthodox synagogues, which were built, of course, in the 19th century, right? They were built. Why were they built? In large part with the express purpose of keeping women out of the sanctuary, not as a mokemat tefillah. No. This is the patriarchy. And the title of this paragraph is Patriarchy in Orthodox Synagogues. Since then, almost all Orthodox synagogues have been constructed with sections set apart for women, behind a curtain on one side, etc. In ancient temple, no gender segregation existed other than one day a year, the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. It's incredible how you can take something and so twist it. Okay, so I'm not even going to read that garbage, but that is, and one could argue, and I'm not suggesting that everybody should be tarred with the same brush, but we have these partnership minyanim. Okay, so how do they work and what are their definitions? I probably should have gone through the women lead certain parts of the service, Kabbalah Shabbos, Brachas, Psukkah de Zimra, Torah chanting and Haftorah chanting. I didn't know we chanted it. Okay. Blessings on the Torah chanting except for the Kohen and Levi. Blessings for the state of Israel and the sick, blessings on the new moon, removing and replacing the Torah in the ark, and end of passage services, animism, mirot, and Aleinu. No, not quite.
Only the chant.
Tilish Tabach, only Psukkah de Zimra. Then we have I'm going to read you, we're going to learn now. We're going to learn in Hebrew. I'll put the link to it on the YouTube video. A tshuva that was written by Rav Hershel Schachter, Shlita. I believe it was 2013. I'll get the exact date of it. There is then a response to it by Rabbi Yisachar Katz, who is one of the leading lights in YCT, Yeshivas Chayvei Torah, which is very much associated with the Open Orthodox movement. We will then also learn a response to Rabbi Yisachar Katz's response from Rabbi Avram Gordima, and we will also look at Rabbi Daniel Sperber, who is an interesting individual. It's clearly a Talmud Chacham, but he very much believes in giving women smicha, and he's a supporter of partnership minyanim. And then there is for the purposes of the video, there's an issue of tradition, which is I suppose it's I don't know if it's directly associated with Yeshiva University, but it is the flagship, the RCA. Yeah, it's from the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, and it is their flagship publication, which comes out regularly. And there is a supplement. This was from winter 2013, special supplement to tradition, Women, Kriyas HaTorah and Aliyot by Aria and Dov Frima, and there's a lot to it there, and we'll see how much we can get through. So we're probably going to dedicate a few sessions to this. Let's learn some Torah. Okay, enough shtussim for one day. Let's learn some Torah. So Rav Schachter, right, so let's learn this tshuva. Nizbakashti mitalmidai u'mechabrei lechavas daiti b'ksav al dva ha'hanhoga ha'mechudeshes shenihigu b'miktzas b'ti knesios in inverted commas, orthodoxim, l'chabed noshim b'miktsas mehel aliyos, v'chein sheyeshamshu anoshim kashatz l'psuke de zimra, l'pirkei tehillim shel kabbalas Shabbos, v'af hidfisu kuntrus meyuchad shel piskei halacha avur minyanim elu imara mekoimus, merishonim v'achroinim, al kol sif v'sif. So a kuntrus was put out, a publication was put out, which on the face of it looks serious and scholarly and orthodox. And their claim is, we do not come to distort halacha. Yeah, we come not to bury Caesar. Yeah, we come not to bury halacha, but with fealty and fidelity and loyalty to tradition, we wish to find innovative and creative rabbinic wills to create a halachic way for what we think is right. Okay, Ledati. So let's see how he starts, because there's so much to unpack. Rav Schachter is a Godel B'Torah. You remember him from being here?
I wasn't.
You didn't. Chaval. You can Google him. You can look up and hear many hundreds of his shiurim. And to be clear, I'm deliberately doing this. I'm not bringing the psak, which are from Baron Feldman or Aguda, or I am deliberately bringing from the modern Orthodox world, from the foremost posek in the modern Orthodox world, right? This is Reb Hershel Schachter, Shlita, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, right? Ledati, loy kol avrech shalomad b'yeshiva, oy afilu b'koilel, oy afilu sh'usmach l'rav, rashoy l'chavez das b'psak halacha. First, point number one, not every guy who's been in the mirror for 5 years, or even in koilel for 10 years, or even has smicha as a rav, has the ability or the authority, the legitimacy to paskin. L'chavez das b'psak halacha.
That's a heavy point.
Now, we need therefore to define, so what's called psak? Okay, I have smicha, I learned for a few years, and I do paskin. Is he telling me off? Maybe he is. Maybe he is. And actually, before we go any further, I want to make an important point. And that is a point about arrogance and humility. Let me give you a very simple moshel. And I used this once in a discussion with quite a strong feminist who was very persuasive in her arguments, actually. And I said as follows. Imagine somebody who's an undergraduate in physics, yes, were to come out in an important new idea about cosmology and would directly take on Stephen Hawking, write a paper and flatly argue with Stephen Hawking. Would that paper be taken seriously? So at first blush, you would say, well, people would read the paper and they would kind of decide, is there any evidence? Has this person really bested Stephen Hawking? But the way generally it works in Torah, as it works in any other discipline, how do you prove yourself? Who decides? Who appointed Stephen Hawking as the world's foremost cosmologist? Albert Einstein, Richard Feynman, whoever. Like any other system, you are recognized by your own peers, those who are well-versed in the discipline, whatever the discipline is, and this is true, whether it's maths, whether peer review. That's what happens. You prove yourself, you publish. And those who are experts in the field read and review and carry out your experiments and see, is this guy onto something or not? And you rise through the ranks. Who appointed Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach to be the posek gadol? Reb Moshe Feinstein. Who decided? Klal Yisrael decided. Why? We have a system of peer review that is more intensive than any other. Think about it. How many hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people are learning Torah intensively every single day around the world? And this is a world where this is the most critical, and we're not easily persuaded. And they rise through the ranks through that, and they publish, and their psokim and their things stand up to scrutiny. And that's, by the way, besides for even talking any about their midas or being a godel b'Torah. There's no such thing as being an arrogant, nasty person and being a godel b'Torah. even though theoretically you can and you do have somebody who's the world's best physicist and can be a terrible human being. But leaving that aside, and they rise through the ranks, and then until you become who you become, and there is no process of vetting that is more thorough than that. And therefore I turned around to this person and I said, if Rabbi Elyashiv would come along and say that Partnership Minyanim, at the time he was alive, would come along and say, I've looked it through, and yes, this is really solid, and this is something we should do. I said, I'll be the first one to create a Partnership Minyan in our Kehillah. But because some rabbi, even if he's a big Talmud Chacham, but if it is utterly rejected based on Torah by all those who are preeminent in the field, then instead, maybe this person should gain a little bit of humility and realize it's not a machlokas. If some rabbi decides to argue with all the poskim on something, then that will be a das yochid. It will not even be accepted. It may not even be a machlokas. And this is really what's happening. So at the root of it, you will often find there's an arrogance. In other words, it's the difference between having a target and shooting an arrow, or shooting an arrow and then drawing the target around it. Torah is, as it is currently, tefillah, as it is currently practiced, is misogynistic. It's patriarchy. We need to change it. Let's see if we can shoehorn some halachas into this in a way that we can consider it to be orthodox. And oh yes, the devil can quote the Bible. We'll bring Mara Makoma. So the starting point is dishonest. You have a goal. You've decided already. We need to do this. Now let's see how we can do this. And let's officially try and do it within halacha. So this is the first point, is one of pure, sheer arrogance. The chutzpah that somebody might be a Talmud Chacham, to think that they're going to upend a Masorah, a way of doing things that was makubal in Klal Yisrael across continents, across cultures, you're not even talking about just some guys with furry hats in Poland. You're talking about the Yidden in Tunisia and Yemen and Argentina and Morocco, who had Ga'inim and Gedolim. Yes, they wore different clothes, they had different customs, they sang different tunes, they ate different foods, and they did some stuff very differently. None of them would agree. There's nothing to talk about. It's the sheer arrogance. But unfortunately, we have to fight fire with fire. And therefore, Rav Herschel, the other poskim would not even... It's so blatantly obvious that it's so off. But Rav Herschel Schachter, in his humility, treats it with a seriousness that it does not deserve, and attacks it and responds. So this is the first point he makes. Not every guy who has smicha, or even maybe a Talmud Chacham, and there are one or two people, certainly Daniel Sperber is a Talmud Chacham, but doesn't mean that you can be Mechaver Das. First of all, the concept of Chacham Shehigia L'Hoirah, and by the way, that's how I can paskin, because most, if not all of what I paskin, is not really Hoirah. Well, some of it is, but again, it's only on the basis of the Kabbalahs I've received from my Rebbes, how to paskin in different situations. Opening up a Mishnah Berurah and paskening, that's not Hoirah. Anybody can and should and must do that. It's when it doesn't quite fit into that category, or there's a b'di'evet, there's a shas adchak, there's something, then you need Hoirah. To be a chacham shehigia l'Hoirah, ba'inan, lo rak sheyehei la'adam yedios b'kol ha'Torah kula. Not only must you know shas and poskim, ela gam sheyehei ha'adam mu'uzan b'talmudoi, balanced in his learning. V'hishra b'zeh ma shekosav Rabbeinu Agon, Rabbi Yosef David Soloveitchik, b'shnas Tovshin Chof, shemin ha'yeshivos yotzim loimdei Torah v'shomer mitzvahs ad kedei dikduk b'kutzo shel yud shel ha'masorah. From the yeshivas, people come out, those who learn Torah and keep mitzvahs, and to be very medakdek, to be particular in the kutzo shel yud. That's a rabbinic, a flowery expression. The tag on the top of a yud of the Masorah, we have a Masorah. B'nei Torah halonim ba'umka shel halacha. Ani mitzta'er al sholosh toifos sheliliyos. Writes Rav Soloveitchik, I am upset about three negative developments. Oid lo zachinu lechanech gedolei Torah amitiyim she'aleihem nizgoeh. We have not successfully managed to produce true Gedolei Torah about whom we can be proud. Yesh chugei Torah v'yesh gam talmidei chachomim. There are Torah circles. There are talmidei chachomim. Ve'ein anshei koima Toratis. There are no men of stature. Anshei koima, Torah men of stature, Gedolim. Hanitzonim niru ba'aretz, and here he uses a poetic expression from Shir HaShirim. Hanitzonim niru ba'aretz avad oid loy porcha hagefen b'chol tif'arta. It's a literary, flowery allusion, quite literally. The blossoms can be seen in the land, but the geffen has not sprouted and bloomed in all its glory. Mitzad echad noitim heimot si'irei America. On the one hand, the youngsters of America, they have an inclination. Lipa'omim likitzonius mufrezes hamavhila b'shachzanusa. Difficult always to translate exactly. The extremes and extremism is attractive. And sometimes they turn to the opposite way. He points out an incredibly important it's an insight into what was in his day. This was written in 1960. The youth of America are idealistic, and their idealism causes them sometimes to be go very much to the right, too much so, to the point of being insensitive. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes they ought to go to the other expression, the other side, which is to be mevater, to concede on matters of halachic principle, to give in for the sake of being nice and good and social justice. B'mila, in other words, he says, B'mila achas nevuchim heim b'shvilei hayahadus. They are lost and confused in the pathways of Judaism. Umevuchazi zu hi bas tfisas olam v'chavayas olam bilti meshuchleles. It's an incredible insight, and we see it to this day. It's very hard to get that balance. He writes in the name of the altar about who writes against the yeshiva boys, products of the Lithuanian yeshiva system that don't have the balance. They don't know when to be machmir and when to be mekel. He says there was a case that the Rav Soloveitchik wrote about an Odom Godel Echad shehechmir leso dag hatuna. He forbade the eating of tuna. On the other hand, he allowed a married woman to remarry without a get. He made a mistake of some sort. And this is another cause celeb who we don't need to go into it. At the time in medieval Europe, there was something called the Vad Arba Arotzos. There was a council of the four lands. You had pan-communal structures. I don't know whether you've heard of Ahu, Altona, Hamburg, Wandsbek. There were councils set up to preserve Yiddishkeit, to oversee the running of communities with takonos and all this sort of stuff. Until quite recently, every kehillah had its book, a pinkas of the kehillah, a book of takonos, of its own minhagim, the Chevra Kadisha, the registration, everything was regulated. They had the power, and it's based in Shulchan Aruch still. You should learn it sometime. They had the power to impose monetary fines and on members of the kehillah who didn't behave properly, or to impose communal taxes to pay for things, whether it was the chazan or the rav or the whatever. And there are halachic powers. These are mentioned in the Rishonim and paskened in Shulchan Aruch. Anyway, so one of the takonos of the Vad Arba Rotzos was Shalei lahadfis shum sefer b'halacha b'li haskama b'gdolei haTorah, not to publish any sefer in halacha unless it has approbations, it gets haskamas from Gedolei Torah. Ubitshuvas minchas shloima hidfis hagoyin hamonoyach Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach zatzales shuvosei hayudua. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach published Chelik Aleph Siman Ches, a well-known tshuva benidon roifa shenikra l'cholim mesukun b'Shabbos. He writes about his well-known tshuva about a doctor that is called to travel to somebody who is dangerously ill on Shabbos. Im rashoy lachzeh lebeis alidei chilul Shabbos d'oraisa. Is he allowed to return home using chilul Shabbos d'oraisa? but brackets, Bahu Chelik al Das Hagun Rabbi Moshe Feinstein Zal, Bala Mechaber Sefer Igros Moshe. He argues with Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in that teshuva. V'kosav beha'ora shebetchilas hatshuva. Listen to what Rabbi Shlomo Zalman writes. He says, Hineni mefarsim ma'amar zeh. I am publishing this halachic statement, La'acha shehagon hanal shlita nosan li reshus al kach. I consulted Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and I asked him permission to publish my view, which runs counter to his view. Wow. And Rabbi Moshe agreed, and that's why I'm doing it. Hareish yesh hanhogas shel derech eretz, afilu be'inyone pirsume psak halacha. There's a concept of derech eretz, and this is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman. You know, there's another tshuva, by the way. Let me tell you the opposite. There is a tshuva in Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, at least one. There's one that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't think Rav Shachter mentions it later, where he is asked a shaila about, yes, I know what it's about. It was about something to do with Shemitah. Yeah? Something to do with Shemitah. And he says what he says. There's more than one tshuva on it. But then he writes a paragraph, and really I should show it to you. Remind me, I'll not now, I'll show it to you. Where he says, but because you are writing this to me, he says, but I totally accept that this psak I'm giving is for America. You have in Eretz Yisrael, you have Gedolei HaTorah in Eretz Yisrael, go and ask Rabbi Shlomo Zalman. So it's reciprocated. Both of them, by the way, a Godel knows when to be assertive when to be humble. When it's right to be assertive and when not. But the concept of collegiality. Yeah, every therapist needs a supervisor. We've spoken about this, I think. Yeah. Every Rav also needs. There are issues which I call up Rabbeim and people you have to have the humility to realize when something is above your pay grade. And if you don't realize that, and this is an example of upending a millennia at least. Sorry for this article. It's not orthodoxy didn't just emerge as a response to reform in the 19th century. But this is the way davening has always been done, to upend that without just by some younger man or some one or two rabbis, even if they are Talmidei Chachamim, just publishing and going their own way without any reference or asking, or those the universally acknowledged Gedolei Torah of all the different streams of orthodoxy is just arrogance in the extreme. That's the first point he's making. There is hanhogas of derech eretz. Next paragraph. V'hinei kroksiv ruchi asher lecho dvar asher samti beficha lo yamushu. The pasuk says, we say to Nevolat Zion, ruchi asher lecho dvar asher samti beficha. Regilam ha'olam loima she'ba'America yesh bitui ba'anglit. In America they say, there's a statement in English, the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. V'ruchi asher alecha, it's referring to ruach haTorah v'ruach ha'alocha. Udvarei asher samti beficha is the letter of the law. And therefore, which one comes first? Ruchi asher alecha, the spirit comes first, and then comes the letter of the law. And to bring in revolutionary, radical new ideas, which it's not enough that it's going to be according to the letter of the law, it also needs to comport with the spirit of the law. Next paragraph. There is an obligation to listen to Takonos Chazal. And therefore we can make a bracha even on mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. How can you say a bracha on mitzvahs d'Rabbanan? Yeah. The pasuk says, is not, so he asks a Lomdisha question. How can you tell me that the source to listen to Chazal is based on a pasuk Sha'al avicha v'yagedecha? That pasuk itself is not a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah. It's not one of the 613 mitzvahs. That pasuk. The answer is is the mitzvah of Ahavtos Hashem Elikecha. Interesting thing. The mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem is not just an emotional mitzvah, but it is also mechayvas ha'Ivorim. It also devolves on at a practical level on somebody. We are obligated to act in a way that demonstrates our love for Hashem. If you want to, you have to demonstrate that you love somebody by doing something. Fine. And then you could talk about Mesilas Yesharim. I want to move on. From this. Let's get to some of the points. Okay. Just a second. Okay, go to. It's the. I didn't put page numbers on it. V'hinei betchilas tnuas reform. You got it? V'hinei betchilas tnuas reform in Higu Rabbanim Talmidei Chachamim al pi hamavur b'Shulchan Aruch. At the beginning of reform, Rabbanim who were Talmidei Chachamim, on the basis of that which is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, given that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does never rejects the tefillah of Rabbim, and therefore we know that tefillah b'tzibur, we don't need the malachim to bring our tefillahs to Hashem. Hashem is therefore there. Therefore, lefichach mutar lispalel afilu belaz shel sfas hamedina. And therefore they pasken that it is okay to daven even in the vernacular, in German. V'nehigul hispalel b'tzibur b'germanit, k'dei sheyavinu hamispalelim b'toyves toichen hatfilos. And this was started, he says, by Rabbanim Talmidei Chachamim, on the basis of what it says in Shulchan Aruch, that you can do that. V'chein inhigu al pi amuva b'Shulchan Aruch Erechaim shin lamed ches, sheyos dekaimelon sheshvus teshvus b'mokaim mitzvah muteres, given that a shvus teshvus, you know what's a shvus teshvus? Shvus is a drabonon on Shabbos. It's more than that, but we'll keep it simple. The classic shvus on a drabonon on Shabbos is amira la'akum, right? Is to ask a goy that, and to ask a goy to do a drabonon is a double drabonon, because getting him to do a malacha is itself a drabonon. Asking him to do a malacha drabonon is a shvus teshvus. Right, which in some circumstances, shvus teshvus paskins the Shulchan Aruch b'mokim mitzvah, shvus teshvus in the place of a mitzvah is mutter. Shebemokim shetomid menagmin b'klei shir b'sudas sheva brachas mutter levakesh me'anochri she'inagin b'klei shir b'shabbos b'sudas mitzvah shel sheva brachas. If you read the Shulchan Aruch kipshutai, it would appear that it is mutter to ask a goy to play a musical instrument at a Sheva Brachas. It's shvus teshvus b'mokem mitzvah on Shabbos, obviously, right? V'al pi zeh, and therefore on the basis of that, in higuhem levakish me'nochri l'nagein ba'orgel. So therefore they got a goy. Let me finish the paragraph. They asked a goy. So number one, the first thing they did was let's start davening in German, and it's based on what it says in Shulchan Aruch, because tefillah b'tzibur we don't need the malachim. We don't, therefore Hashem is there. He always accepts the tefillah of tefillas b'tzibur, and therefore we can do it in German. Why not? Next point, we have shvus teshvus b'mokem mitzvah. So let's get an organist in to play the organ as we're doing musaf. Beautiful. What's wrong with that? It's all al pi halacha. It'll be such a nicer experience. V'echlito harabbanim oheim. And those Rabbanim decided, and listen to these words, She'ein minat seirech lishal eitza eitzel gedoyle ha'adoyrahu. I don't need to ask anybody. Why would I need to ask? Ki aloyas hakol osu al pi ha'halacha mefureshes b'shulchan aruch. They did it, and do you hear what he's done? He's cited two historical examples of things which appear on the face of it to be mutter al pi Shulchan Aruch, and these were the first two practices which were included into prayer service in tefillah in Germany, in doing it in German, davening in German and bringing in an organ, and it was done al pi Shulchan Aruch. And they said to themselves, why do I need to ask? It's mefurish in Shulchan Aruch. Sorry, what did you want to say?
It seems to me so much that musical instruments on Shabbos have more like a derisa component than...
Where's your... Sorry?
No, I thought that...
Why? What? What's the issa?
Musical instruments.
Yes.
In general.
Yes.
I thought that they were played in the Beit HaMikdash.
What is the issa to play a musical instrument on Shabbos?
That it's only because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash anymore.
Oh, never. Sorry, guys.
Just to be coming to fix it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's a
I know.
gezerah. It's a Mishnah in Beitza.
Right, no.
And Tosfos even says, I mean, we can.
Okay, but
It's not.
Yeah.
No, it's a drabanan.
Okay.
It's definitely a drabanan. Okay.
no, I know that this
It's
thing
a
we just
Rabbanon.
spoke about is a Rabbanon, of course.
So it's drabanan. So asking a guy to do it, b'mokim mitzvah, is a drabanan. It's a double drabanan. Asking the guy is drabanan number one.
Yeah.
To do something which is also drabanan in the place of a mitzvah, which the Shulchan Aruch says is mutter, technically for a sheva brachas. So let's do it in shul. It's also a mokim mitzvah, right? Ela sheta'u bezeh, but actually they made it. What was the mistake? Shekeyodua zehoyat chilas tnuas reform. The slippery slope. It's sometimes called the slippery slope argument. This is how it started. Shele b'soif. Ozvu legamri as derech hashulchan aruch de lahanig hanhoges mechudoshes shekeelu tzrichim haskomas gedoylei Torah. Let's analyze, says Rav Shachter, where did they go wrong? They started off by doing something which might technically have been permitted, but you are making a fundamental change in the public square of something that has been done in a particular way. That is a Masorah. And they did not have. You see what he's done? He's done an incredible thing. He's identified the core, the root of the problem, which led the top of this slippery slope, which led all the way down to reform and where it is today, a total rejection of Judaism as we know it. Tzrichim haskomas gedolei Torah. They ought to have consulted. V'lei maspik shestam Talmud Chacham chipes b'Shulchan Aruch. It's not enough for some Talmud Chacham to be fluent or conversant with Shulchan Aruch, and he found that this particular practice is mat'ima im ha'halacha. Dilahanig hanhoges mechudoshes ba'inun sheyeh l'shem avas Hashem b'bchinas doidecha. It has to be l'shem shamayim, motivatzia tahora, v'shehi lefi ruach ha'torah. As I have said. And then he quotes here in the brackets, just very briefly, a quote from Rav Soloveitchik, that when they talk about women's prayer groups, not to be confused with Partnership Minyanim, women's prayer groups, where women would get together just to daven. Women's prayer groups. Women got together to daven. Rav Soloveitchik responded by saying, I can't say it's osa, but it is something she'ein ruach chachomim noicha himenu. It's not a good idea. It's not ruach chachomim. V'hanegim kein oisim shaloi barotzen chachomim. And he said that alone, the fact that I have said that this is something which is shaloi barotzen chachomim, should be enough to stop you. That's in the brackets. V'hinei, dovi yoduahu, she'al pi roiv, hamaniya lanhoges elu amchudoshes, horotzen lesakin isa she'ivsu rabbeinu meshech kol hadoros. He says, let us be clear about one thing. Generally speaking, the motivation, the impulse to bring in these things usually is to fix that which our forefathers, our Chazal, have messed up, in inverted commas, b'meshech kol hadoros. What did they do? They denied women their voice, their rights. We have, for the patriarchal Chazal prevented women from having their voice heard and their face seen, etc., from being a chazan and getting an aliyah. This was the Sadducees, the Tzidokim. This is what they said as well. They said the same thing about women getting Yerusha, inheritance. He quotes the Gemara in Bava Basra. Udvarim koshim omru aleim hatanoim. The Tanoim spoke back to them very harshly. V'kama me'adeis hanhogas shelat tzidukim shemidoros harishonim, and Christianity also. And therefore, I will stop here for today. But the motivation, so he's highlighted a couple of things. He's given us a very interesting, fascinating historical insight at the beginning of Reform. So don't think it's game over just because you think what you're doing is Al-Pi Chazal. If it has not been, when it's something as major as this, a major change in the public space, you need to understand the motivation, you need to understand the process, and it's not enough for some Talmud Chacham who may be fluent or conversant in Shulchan Aruch to say, oh, it's technically permitted. That is just simply not good enough. And that's before we get to the actual halachic issues, which we will do.